Hello and thank you so much for staying tuned to Champions TV. This is Nature Talk and I'm your host Grace Acheng. Today our topic of discussion is about nutrient cycling in the ocean. And our guest in studio today is a marine specialist and his name is Michael Lestakov. So welcome once again to our studios, Michael. And just to begin with, maybe you can tell us what nutrient cycling in the ocean means.
Thank you once again. Basing on the topic of discussion today, nutrient cycle is the interaction between the intakes and the outtakes that involves the movement of a particular nutrient from one form. It can either be liquid, solid, or to the other state, and from one place to another. Yeah.
And so maybe you can just highlight to us what are some of the components of the nutrient cycling in the oceans?
Basically, the major components of nutrients in the ocean comprises of carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle. We have got salt cycle and dissolved organic matter, minerals, And the major ones are basically the carbon cycle, the salt cycle, and the oxygen cycle.
And so what does these cycles involve? Maybe like the way you have highlighted the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. So what do they involve? What are some of the activities that take place?
Basically, when it comes to the main one, which is main in the sea, is the carbon cycle. Because just as in the land, we've got carbon being required for photosynthesis by sea plants, the phytoplanktons, and the algae matter in the ocean. They require this carbon for photosynthesis, so it is like a main requirement. And its cycle involves a number of phases which ranges from the abiotic to the biotic components. And speaking about carbon cycle, we've got the main source of carbon cycle is the carbonic minerals in the water. An example of limestone. Yeah. So when limestone dissolves in water, it releases the carbonic components into the sea. It is a main input when it comes to carbon. And apart from limestone or carbonic minerals, we've got the rivers, because the sea is also made up of the various rivers which empty their waters into the sea. And these various rivers accumulate various minerals all along the way. Like, for example, in Kenya, we've got the river Tana, which starts from a very far off distance and empties its waters into the Indian Ocean. So before it empties the waters into the Indian Ocean, there are several minerals being accumulated, and these minerals are being emptied into the sea. So some of these minerals are containing salt components. Yeah, so the saltiness and the carbon components too, because in as much as there are these types of let's say in these rivers they are happening decomposition process, or let's say processes like respiration. This carbon will be transferred from the inland waters into the sea. And also from the various carbonic components we get some things like the oil stuff from the industries. They also empty carbonic components into these rivers, which later emptied their waters into the sea or the ocean. So basing on other factors which releases carbon into the ocean, we get the biotic. The biotic is now the living components. Like we've got the respiration from animals. And most of these sea organisms also, they take in oxygen and give out carbon. So that is also another source. But mostly this geological time scale, actually the longest, carbon has two geological time scales in the ocean. We have the long time scale and the short geological time scale of carbon. The short geological is biotic based and the long is geological based, mainly from the withering of those carbonic minerals. So this time scale is offset or is interrupted when there is the burning of fossil fuel, being that ocean is a main carbon sink in the world of today, and it stores over 70% of the Earth's carbon in the ocean floor. So this carbon is being offset, the geological timescale is being offset by the continuous burning of massive fossil fuel, which releases a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. And this carbon into the atmosphere will go through these other processes, like I have explained before, and will get back to the ocean. Yeah. So that is majorly on carbon. And we've got also, before we continue, carbon increases with depth. It increases with depth because it's required in the shallower levels of the ocean for photosynthesis. But in the deeper levels, the organisms in those deeper levels of the ocean give out their carbon. So when they give out carbon, it is the quantity of carbon in water becomes much more in the deeper oceans than in the shallow. Like in the deep parts of the ocean, carbon is around 83%, the concentration of carbon, while as compared to the surface, which is around 15%. And it also ranges with oceans, the biodiversity in the oceans, because the ocean which contains much of biodiversity will experience much of carbon concentration as compared with the one with low biodiversity of organisms. And in as much as the sea plants also utilize this carbon, the rate of production or the inflow of carbon in the ocean is far much higher compared to the rate of utilization or output. So mostly we find a lot of carbon remaining in the ocean, leading to things like ocean acidification. And in terms of ocean acidification, being that carbon is contained in the state of bicarbonates and carbonates, these bicarbonates, when they decompose, they release excess hydrogen ions. And the excess hydrogen ions increases the acidity of the ocean. And continuous release of this hydrogen will lead to a reduction in the ocean pH, of which since 2002, the ocean has undergone around 0.3 reduction in pH, which is approximately 30% increase in acidity of the ocean. And this has various effects on various organisms, like we got corals and also other types of organisms in the sea. Now on oxygen, oxygen is a major factor when it comes to respiration, and it is around 6% in the ocean waters. And concentration of oxygen decreases with depth. It is the inverse of carbon. Yeah. So it decreases with depth. And this can also be offset by the fact that dissolution of gases in water increases with the decrease in temperature. So like in areas of lower temperature, you will find the concentration of oxygen is higher. And also in major parts of the seas which are cold, you will find the level or the concentration of oxygen is high. The major requirement for oxygen in the sea is for the organisms which respire. The sea plants give out oxygen as a byproduct, just as the plants in the normal world do. But now, when they release the oxygen, it is taken up by the animals. And the animals here take this oxygen through respiration as they give out carbon dioxide. And the various biodiversity in the sea require oxygen. Yeah. So oxygen circulates within the ocean based on the solubility, the temperature, and the pressure, such that an increase in let's say pressure will lead to a decrease in oxygen concentration, because most of the times that pressure is high at the deeper levels of the water and temperature is lower there. So when you base in terms of temperature, the lower temperature will accommodate more oxygen. But when it comes to pressure, the higher pressure will accommodate low oxygen. Yeah. So it circulates in the ocean from the atmosphere. It ranges from the atmospheric and hydrospheric zones through the biota, or the living components, like the organisms there. And oxygen mainly, when it comes to the ocean variations in concentration of oxygen, it happens when concerning the biodiversity. The higher the biodiversity, the lower concentration of oxygen. The lower diversity, the higher concentration of oxygen.
Okay. So thank you so much for staying tuned to Champions TV, where we empower people. We are going for a short commercial break, and stay tuned to Champions TV for the second section of our discussion.